It started with a buzz, a faint, almost insignificant vibration on the nightstand beside me. I wouldn't have noticed it if it hadn't been so close to my ear, but even then, I almost ignored it. After all, a buzz in the middle of the night could be anything: a promotional email, a spam message, or another one of those irritating app notifications. It wasn't unusual, but something about this buzz was off. I turned my head toward the glow of my phone, squinting against the harsh light as I reached for it. The clock read 12:38 a.m., the time when no one with good intentions should be contacting you. I swiped at the screen lazily, hoping to dismiss whatever it was and get back to sleep. But when I saw the notification, I froze. It wasn't a text. It wasn't an email. It was an alert from my banking app: unusual activity detected on your account. A surge of cold panic rushed through me, chasing away any remnants of sleep. My thumb trembled as I tapped on the notification. The app opened with its usual sterile interface, but the message that greeted me wasn't routine. Access to account data detected from an unrecognized device. For a second, I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe the app was glitching, or maybe I'd logged in from another device and forgotten about it. But deep down, I knew better. I hadn't accessed my account all day. My laptop was shut down, and my phone was locked. That's when I noticed something else. A second notification. This one was worse. $371,000 transferred to an external account. My breath hitched. $371,000? Not just a large sum. An entire year's worth of meticulous savings for a business venture I'd been planning. It wasn't just money. It was a symbol of years of hard work and late nights, sacrifices, and plans for the future. Gone. Just like that. The sound of my pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at the screen. The transaction had occurred barely 10 minutes ago. Whoever did this wasn't just reckless. They were bold. I sat up in bed, careful not to wake her. She lay beside me, her breathing even, as though she were dreaming sweet, innocent dreams. It wasn't the time to jump to conclusions, but the unsettling thought began creeping into my mind. Could she have done this? I glanced at her sleeping form. It didn't make sense. She had her own accounts, her own resources. But there had been moments recently, little things. The whispered phone calls in the other room. The sudden upgrades in her wardrobe. The weekend trips she'd started taking with vague explanations about visiting friends. Were those signs I'd ignored? Was this something bigger than I'd realized? Shaking my head, I focused back on the app. First, I needed answers. My fingers worked quickly, navigating through the transaction details. The receiving account was registered to someone I didn't recognize. The name meant nothing to me, but the location stood out. A small resort town known for its high-end boutiques and private villas. My stomach churned. This wasn't just theft, it was premeditated. Whoever did this had a plan. And then it hit me. How had someone accessed my banking details in the first place? My password wasn't something anyone could guess, and I never shared it. I opened my phone settings, scrolling through the list of installed apps. That's when I saw it. A new app that hadn't been there before. Spylink. The name was a dead giveaway. Spyware, designed to track my every move. My login credentials, my keystrokes, everything. I stared at the app in disbelief. How long had it been there? Who had installed it? I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. I turned back to her, my wife, sleeping so peacefully. The dots were connecting too quickly now. Her sudden interest in my work schedule, her vague excuses for borrowing my phone, her growing distance. It all pointed to her. And if she had done this, there was no way it was an accident. But why? That was the real question. Was it greed? Spite? A desire for freedom? I had no answers, only a tightening knot of dread in my chest. If it was her, she wouldn't have stopped at $371,000. There was likely more I hadn't uncovered yet. For the next hour, I combed through every detail I could find. App logs, transaction history, and even the app permissions. Each discovery felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. She had installed the app weeks ago, accessing not just my bank account but my emails, my texts, and my calendar. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was deliberate, calculated, and personal. By the time I put the phone down, the clock read 2:14 a.m. I hadn't even realized how much time had passed. My body was drained, but my mind raced. There was no going back from this. I had to confront her, but not yet. Not without a plan. I looked at her one last time before lying back down. If she thought she'd outsmarted me, she was in for a surprise. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to turn the tables. The morning after discovering the truth, I woke up to the scent of freshly brewed coffee. For a fleeting moment, it felt like a regular day. The kind of morning we used to share before everything started feeling off. My wife, smiling and humming softly, handed me a cup as if she hadn't just turned my world upside down the night before. I accepted it, careful to keep my face neutral. I studied her from across the kitchen table. She was dressed impeccably, a flowing blouse paired with sleek slacks, looking every bit the picture of someone who had no worries in the world. The usual signs of stress, her furrowed brows, absent-minded stares, were gone. Instead, she seemed almost radiant. That only confirmed my suspicions. She had done this. My mind rewound to the subtle changes over the past few weeks. She had been borrowing my phone more often, always under the guise of needing to check something urgent. I remembered one time in particular, about a month ago. I had left my phone on the coffee table while watching TV. She had picked it up casually, claiming she wanted to check the weather app. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? She was my wife, after all. But now, with everything I had uncovered, that memory stood out like a red flag. Then there were the financial discussions, or rather, the lack thereof. She had been strangely uninterested in our finances lately. Normally, she'd insist on going through the budget together. But recently, every time I tried to bring it up, she'd brush me off with an excuse about being too tired or too busy. It was also clear now. She'd been laying the groundwork for weeks, if not months, and I had played right into her hands. "Anything exciting happening at work today?" she asked, her voice cheerful. Too cheerful. I shook my head, keeping my tone casual. Same old, same old. What about you?" She shrugged, sipping her coffee. "Oh, just a few errands. Nothing major." Errands. Right. I wondered if her errands included packing for her impending trip or finalizing plans with whoever might be waiting for her on the other side of this scheme. As I watched her chat about her day, my stomach churned. The idea that the person sitting across from me, the person I'd shared my life with, could betray me so effortlessly was almost too much to bear. But I forced myself to stay composed. I needed more than just suspicions and fragmented evidence. I needed confirmation. Later that morning, while she was in the shower, I slipped into her home office. Her laptop was open, and I hesitated only for a moment before sitting down and logging in. She hadn't bothered to change her password, likely assuming I'd never snoop. Big mistake. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There, in her email, was a confirmation for a first-class flight departing in 2 days. Destination: a luxury resort in the Caribbean. She had booked it using the same account tied to the stolen $371,000. As I scrolled further, I found receipts for extravagant purchases, designer clothes, high-end jewelry, and even a reservation at an exclusive spa. It was all there, neatly laid out, as if she wanted me to find it. Or maybe she was so confident in her plan that she didn't care. I leaned back in the chair, my heart pounding. She was preparing for the trip of a lifetime, using my hard-earned money to fund it. And she had no intention of telling me. In fact, based on the timing of the flight, she likely planned to disappear while I was at work, leaving me to discover the theft too late to do anything about it. I closed the laptop and stood, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The betrayal was real, and it was massive. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't the same clueless man she thought she'd been deceiving. While she was out living her best life, I had already started working on a counterplan. Over the next 2 days, I watched her closely. She was meticulous in her preparations, carefully packing her bags and making discreet phone calls when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I overheard snippets of conversations, bits and pieces that hinted at her excitement. She spoke about freedom, about finally getting to enjoy life on her own terms. If I hadn't known better, I might have been impressed by how thorough she was. She even mentioned a fabricated work trip to cover her absence, ensuring I wouldn't question her sudden departure. But all of it just added fuel to the fire. The morning of her flight, she kissed me on the cheek before heading out, her suitcase already loaded in the car. "Don't work too hard while I'm gone," she said with a playful smirk. I smiled back, a calm mask hiding the storm inside me. "Have fun on your trip." She raised an eyebrow, her smirk faltering for just a second. Did she sense something in my tone? If she did, she brushed it off quickly. "Oh, I will," she said, her confidence fully restored. I watched her drive away, my mind racing with everything I knew and everything I was about to do. She thought she had one, but the game was just getting started. I didn't need to imagine what her trip looked like. The receipts and confirmations I'd found painted the picture vividly enough. While I sat at home in the house we built together, she was already sipping cocktails on a sun-drenched beach. First-class flights, a private villa with ocean views, daily spa treatments, and shopping sprees at designer boutiques. I knew she was living it up. Every detail of her betrayal was etched into my mind, and each new mental image felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my back. At first, I wondered if she felt any guilt at all. But then I remembered the smirk she'd given me as she left the house, the lightness in her step as she rolled her suitcase out the door. No, guilt wasn't part of her equation. She was reveling in her success, basking in the idea that she had outsmarted me. I could almost hear her voice in my head. "I deserve this. I've earned it. Finally, I get to enjoy life without limits." I had heard her say something similar once, months ago, when we were discussing dreams and aspirations. At the time, I thought she meant she wanted more freedom, more adventures together. I didn't realize she was plotting her escape from me and my bank account. 2 days after she left, I received the first real proof of how far she had gone. A notification popped up on my phone from the bank's monitoring system. Her spending was outrageous, far beyond anything I'd imagined. A $10,000 charge at a luxury boutique, a $3,500 dinner at a 5-star restaurant, even a helicopter tour of the island, setting her back another $8,000. She wasn't just spending the money. She was burning through it like it would never run out. I laughed when I saw the charges, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything I needed to know about her state of mind. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a desperate act. This was calculated, deliberate, and selfish. She didn't just take the money. She was flaunting it, showing the world she was free of any constraints, even me. The final straw came when a courier dropped off a package at the house. Inside was a postcard from her. A postcard. Who even sends those anymore? On the front was a picture of the idyllic beach she was likely lounging on, complete with palm trees and crystal clear water. On the back, in her unmistakable handwriting, was a single line. "Thanks for the upgrade. Spending your $371,000 feels amazing." I sat there, staring at the card, a cocktail of emotions swirling inside me. There was anger, of course, but also disbelief. I'd known her for years, shared countless memories, supported her dreams. And this was what I got in return. She had no idea that her little jab only made me laugh harder. Not because I found it amusing, but because of how clueless she really was. She thought she had taken everything from me, that she'd left me powerless. But she couldn't have been more wrong. Still, the mockery stung. She had underestimated me, assumed I'd be too naive or too devastated to fight back. But what she didn't realize was that the trap she had walked into wasn't just financial, it was personal. Every move she made only reinforced my resolve to see this through. And so, while she was busy sipping margaritas and trying on diamond necklaces, I was setting the stage for her grand return. I wasn't going to stop her from enjoying her vacation. In fact, I wanted her to have the time of her life. The higher she climbed, the harder she'd fall when she realized what was waiting for her. I had already spoken to my legal team and forwarded the evidence to the necessary authorities. I had even alerted the bank to the fraudulent activity. But I kept everything quiet, letting her believe she was in control. I wanted her to feel untouchable, to think she had truly won. The most satisfying part of all of this wasn't the money or the logistics. It was knowing how sweet the reveal would be. When she finally walked back into our house, expecting to gloat about her lavish escapades, She'd be walking into a reality she wasn't prepared for. For now, though, I let her play her game. She could have her fun. She could sip her drinks, pose for photos, and spend my money. Little did she know, the only thing she was truly spending was her own future. The day she returned, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had spent the last week preparing for this moment, every detail planned and executed with precision. The evidence was secured, the paperwork filed, and all that was left was for her to walk through that door. But nothing could have prepared me for the sheer audacity of her entrance. She strolled in mid-afternoon, her designer suitcase rolling behind her, sunglasses perched on her head, and a smug smile plastered across her face. The kind of smile that made you wonder if she had rehearsed it in the mirror before walking in. She didn't even look at me at first, as if I were an afterthought in her grand return. "Hey," she said casually, brushing invisible lint off her jacket. "Miss me?" I leaned back in the armchair, hands folded over my lap, and studied her for a moment. The tropical tan, the faint scent of an overpriced perfume I didn't recognize, and the way she carried herself. It was like she had been reborn as someone else entirely. Someone who clearly believed they had one. "Miss you?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You've been gone?" Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, come on," she teased, her voice dripping with mockery. "Don't be like that. I know you noticed." She set her suitcase down and finally looked at me. There was a glint in her eyes, a mixture of triumph and mischief, as if she couldn't wait to drop the bombshell she'd been holding on to. "Thanks to your mobile," she began, her grin widening, "I really enjoyed spending your $371,000. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, waiting for my reaction. I could see it in her expression. She expected me to be angry, humiliated, maybe even broken. She wanted to savor my pain, to cement her victory by watching me crumble under the weight of her betrayal. Instead, I laughed. Not a small chuckle or a forced smile, but a full-bodied laugh that came from somewhere deep inside me. It caught her off guard, her confident smirk quickly replaced with confusion. She stared at me, eyebrows furrowed, clearly struggling to process my reaction. "What's so funny?" she asked, her voice sharp now. I leaned forward, still chuckling, and gestured toward the couch. "Why don't you sit down? I think you're going to want to hear this." She hesitated, clearly unsure of what to make of my demeanor. But curiosity, or perhaps arrogance, got the better of her, and she sank onto the couch, crossing her legs and folding her arms. "All right," she said, her tone guarded. "Enlighten me." I took a deep breath, the laughter subsiding into a calm, steady resolve. "You think you've won," I began, locking eyes with her. "You think you outsmarted me. But the truth is, you walked straight into a trap." Her confidence wavered. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back, savoring the moment. "The account you accessed? The $371,000 you transferred? It wasn't what you thought it was." Her face paled slightly, but she forced a laugh. "What do you mean?" "I saw the transactions. I spent the money." "Oh, you spent something," I said, nodding. "But it wasn't my money. That account was a decoy, a fake. Every dollar you touched was part of a controlled operation designed to expose fraud. And guess what? You provided all the evidence I needed." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, struggling to form words. That doesn't make any sense. I used your credentials. I saw the balance." I smiled. "Of course you did. That's the beauty of it. The account was set up specifically for this kind of scenario. The moment you accessed it, every move you made was recorded. Your login attempts, your transactions, even your location data. And now, all of that evidence is sitting in the hands of people who know exactly what to do with it." Her hands clenched into fists, her voice rising in anger. "You're lying. You're trying to scare me." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and opened a folder labeled Evidence. I turned the screen toward her, showing screenshots of her spyware installation, transaction logs, and surveillance data from the resort. "You can try to deny it, but the proof speaks for itself." She stood abruptly, pacing the room. This isn't fair. You set me up." "No," I said, my tone hardening. You set yourself up. I trusted you. I shared my life with you. And you threw it all away for what? A week in paradise and some designer handbags? She stopped pacing, her face a mask of fury and panic. You're not going to get away with this. I'll fight back. I stood, towering over her, my voice calm but firm. Go ahead. Fight. But let me remind you of one thing. You're the one who committed fraud. You're the one who stole from me. And now, you're going to face the consequences. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time since she walked through that door, she looked genuinely afraid. As I watched her struggle to process the gravity of the situation, I felt a strange sense of closure. The betrayal still stung, but this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking back control, and I wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, take that from me again. Her fury simmered, but her fear couldn't be hidden anymore. For someone who had prided herself on being in control, the realization that she'd been outplayed was almost too much for her to bear. She paced the room like a caged animal, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The silence between us was thick, the weight of her mistake pressing down on her like a heavy fog. I let her stew for a moment. The truth I was about to reveal was a storm waiting to strike, and I wanted her to feel every second of its approach. Finally, she stopped pacing and turned to me, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. What do you mean it wasn't your money? What kind of game are you playing? I leaned against the edge of the table, my arms crossed casually, as though this was just another conversation over breakfast. It's not a game, I said evenly. The account you accessed was never meant to hold personal funds. It was a decoy, set up as part of a project I've been working on. She frowned, confusion creeping into her expression. What kind of project? The kind that protects people like me from situations like this, I replied, my gaze unflinching. You see, I've dealt with enough financial risks over the years to know that trust isn't always enough. So, I created a secondary account, a controlled system designed to catch fraud, monitor unauthorized access, and record every transaction. The $371,000 you stole? It wasn't real. It was placeholder money, monitored down to the last cent. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw something that looked like genuine shock. You're lying, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. No one goes to that kind of trouble. This isn't normal. You're right, I admitted. It's not normal, but neither is what you did. You underestimated me. You thought I was just another fool who wouldn't notice what you were up to until it was too late. But I've been watching you just as closely as you've been watching me. She blinked, her expression shifting rapidly from confusion to realization. You knew, she whispered. You knew I was going to do this. I nodded. I didn't know when, but I knew something wasn't right. The sudden secrecy, the borrowed phone, the changes in your behavior, it all pointed to this. So, I prepared. She sank into the couch, her hands clutching her head as though she could physically block out my words. This can't be happening, she muttered. You're making this up. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the folder I had prepared. Inside were printed screenshots of the spyware she'd installed, logs of her access attempts, and a detailed list of every purchase she'd made with the stolen money. I placed it in front of her. This, I said, my voice calm but firm, is everything you've done. Every step, every transaction, every lie. It's all here. She hesitated, then opened the folder with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the pages, her face paling with every line she read. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, her attempts to justify, to excuse, to deny. But there was no escaping the truth. This isn't fair, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. I didn't think. You didn't think I'd find out, I finished for her. You didn't think I'd be smart enough to protect myself. You thought you could take what you wanted and walk away without consequences. She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes. I was desperate, she said. You don't understand. Then make me understand, I said, my tone sharp. Explain to me why you thought this was the solution. Why you thought betraying me was your best option. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, She shook her head, the tears spilling over as she buried her face in her hands. I watched her for a moment, a strange mix of emotions churning inside me. Part of me wanted to feel pity, to believe there was some shred of remorse in her breakdown. But another part of me, the part she had betrayed, knew better. "I gave you every chance to talk to me," I said, my voice softer now. "I would have listened. I would have helped. But you chose this path. And now, you have to face the consequences." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "What are you going to do?" I straightened, my resolve hardening. "What I'm going to do doesn't matter. It's already done. The authorities have everything they need. The charges have been filed. And as far as I'm concerned, this marriage is over." Her mouth fell open, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She had thought she held all the cards, that her actions would leave me powerless. But now, she was realizing the truth. She had played herself. I walked toward the door, pausing to look back at her one last time. "You thought you destroyed me," I said quietly, "but all you've done is reveal who you really are. And now, you'll have to live with that." I left her there, sitting on the couch, clutching the folder of her own betrayal. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The truth was out, and the power she thought she had over me was gone. The game was over, and I had one. I gave her time to stew. Sitting on that couch with her carefully orchestrated betrayal now reduced to a pile of printed receipts and damning logs, she looked like a magician caught mid-trick, the wires and mirrors exposed for the world to see. But what she didn't know was that her humiliation was only the beginning. I had one last twist to deliver, a truth that would knock the smugness completely out of her. When I walked back into the room, she glanced up, her eyes still puffy from tears. The look on her face was a mixture of fear and defiance, like a gambler whose bluff had been called but still refused to fold. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "What now?" she finally asked, her voice cracking. "Are you just going to throw me out? Call the cops? Ruin my life?" I tilted my head, studying her. "Ruin your life?" I repeated, as though the very idea amused me. "No, you've already done that to yourself." She flinched, but I pressed on. "Do you even understand what you've done? The account you accessed wasn't just some random savings account. It wasn't even tied to me personally." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" I smiled faintly, leaning against the wall with an air of calm that I knew would unnerve her. "That account," I said, "belongs to an ongoing fraud detection initiative. It's monitored not just by me, but by third-party financial auditors, legal advisors, and, here's the fun part, law enforcement agencies." Her eyes widened, panic flaring in them like a match struck in the dark. "Law enforcement?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "That's right. Every transaction, every transfer, every keystroke you made was recorded and flagged in real time. You didn't just trip a wire. You practically set off fireworks. And now, there's a very detailed report with your name on it, sitting in the hands of people who are very interested in cases like this." She shot up from the couch, her hands trembling. "You're bluffing." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, tapping a few buttons before holding the screen up to her. On it was a notification from the fraud detection team, summarizing her activities in cold, clinical detail. Below it was a time-stamped email chain between me, the auditors, and a federal investigator. The subject line read, "Immediate action required. Unauthorized access detected." Her face drained of color as she read the screen. You set me up?" "No," I corrected, my tone sharp. "You set yourself up. All I did was make sure there was a safety net in place. You're the one who decided to steal. You're the one who decided to betray me. Don't try to shift the blame." She stumbled back, her confidence now completely shattered. But why would you? Why would I protect myself?" I interrupted. "Why would I plan ahead, knowing there was a possibility you might try something like this? Because I'm not an idiot. Because I've seen the signs for months now. The distance, the secrecy, the sudden interest in my phone. I trusted you once, but when you started acting like a stranger, I realized I couldn't anymore." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. "And do you want to know the best part?" I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Not only is the money you stole fake, but the penalties for attempting to steal it are very real. Fraud, unauthorized access, embezzlement. The list goes on." She collapsed back onto the couch, her head in her hands. "You can't do this," she murmured. "I'm your wife." I corrected. "And being my wife didn't stop you from trying to take me for a fool, did it?" For a moment, the only sound in the room was her ragged breathing. Then, she looked up at me, a spark of anger reigniting in her eyes. "So, what now? Are you going to send me to prison? Is that what you want?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "What I want is for you to face the consequences of your actions. What I want is to move on with my life, free from your lies and manipulations. And yes, if prison is what it takes to make that happen, then so be it." Her lip quivered, and I could see the battle raging inside her. Pride versus desperation, arrogance versus fear. But I didn't care what choice she made. The damage was already done, and nothing she said or did could change that. I walked toward the door, pausing only to deliver one final blow. "Oh, and in case you were wondering," I said, glancing back at her, "I've already filed for divorce. The paperwork's in motion, and the assets are frozen. So don't bother trying to pull another stunt. It won't work." She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the floor as the weight of her actions pressed down on her. I stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. She thought she could outsmart me, but in the end, she was just another card in a house destined to fall. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was worried or uncertain, quite the opposite. I stayed awake because I wanted to see everything play out in real time. Her betrayal, her arrogance, and her lack of foresight had set the wheels in motion, and now it was only a matter of time before consequences knocked on her door. By morning, the fallout had already begun. I woke up to several emails, each more satisfying than the last. The bank confirmed the flag transaction, my legal team verified that the evidence had been submitted, and most importantly, the fraud detection team had escalated the case to the authorities. Everything was moving according to plan. She hadn't come out of the bedroom since I walked out the night before. I could hear faint movement inside, drawers opening and closing, the shuffle of papers. She was likely scrambling, trying to figure out how to undo the damage. But there was no undoing this. Every charge she made, every step she took, had already been documented. There was no way out. Finally, around mid-morning, she emerged. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes bloodshot, and the confident demeanor she had paraded around for weeks was completely gone. She looked at me like someone staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. "You called the cops, didn't you?" she asked, her voice hollow. I sipped my coffee, taking my time before responding. "They'll call you," I said simply, not bothering to mask the satisfaction in my tone. Her jaw tightened. "This is my life you're messing with." I set the cup down and leaned back in my chair. "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "This is your life you messed with. All I did was make sure there was a record of it." She started pacing again, her hands tugging at her hair as if trying to pull out the frustration building inside her. "You don't understand," she snapped. "I didn't have a choice. You were always so controlled, so prepared, like you didn't need me. I just wanted to steal $371,000 and live like royalty?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't try to justify this. You had a choice. You could have talked to me, worked things out. Instead, you chose betrayal." Her pacing stopped, and for a moment, she just stood there, staring at the floor. When she finally looked up, there was no anger in her expression, only defeat. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. I stood, crossing the room to stand in front of her. "What happens now is up to the authorities," I said. "But as far as I'm concerned, this marriage is over. You made sure of that the moment you installed spyware on my phone." Her face twisted with a mix of regret and panic. "You can't do this," she whispered. "We can fix this." I shook my head. "You can't fix what you've broken." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. She froze, her eyes darting to me in panic. "Who is that?" I didn't answer. I walked to the door, opening it to reveal two officers standing on the porch, their expressions unreadable but professional. Behind them was a man in a suit, likely a fraud investigator, holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of no-nonsense look that told me he meant business. "Is this the residence of insert her name?" one of the officers asked. "It is," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. Her face went pale as they entered, their presence sucking all the air out of the room. "Ma'am," the investigator began, "we need to speak with you regarding unauthorized access to financial accounts and a flagged transaction totaling $371,000. She stammered, backing away. "There's been a mistake. I didn't." "Everything has been documented," I said, cutting her off. "They have all the evidence they need." She turned to me, desperation etched into every line of her face. "Please," she begged, "don't let them take me. I'll do anything." I folded my arms, my gaze steady. "You already did enough. Now, it's out of my hands." The officer stepped forward, explaining her rights as they placed handcuffs around her wrists. She didn't fight them. She didn't scream or cry. She just stood there, staring at the floor as they led her away. I watched from the doorway as they escorted her to the waiting car. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness. No matter how much she had betrayed me, we had shared a life once. But that life was gone, burned to the ground by her greed and deceit. As the car disappeared down the street, I closed the door and let out a long breath. It was over. The lies, the manipulation, the constant second-guessing. They were all behind me now. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. I was free. I returned to the kitchen, picking up my coffee and taking another sip. It was cold, but I didn't mind. Cold coffee was a small price to pay for peace of mind. The silence in the house after she left was deafening, but it wasn't the kind of silence that felt empty. It was the kind of quiet that followed a storm, the calm when you know the worst has passed. I stood in the middle of the living room, letting it wash over me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. She was gone, and so was the chaos she brought with her. I sat down at the kitchen table, pulling out the divorce paperwork I'd already filed. It wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. I'd prepared for this moment, ensured that all our joint accounts were frozen, and safeguarded my assets. The money she tried to steal was protected, but more importantly, my future was secure. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and meetings. My lawyer reassured me that the evidence I'd collected would make the divorce proceedings straightforward. She wouldn't be able to contest the terms, not with her actions so thoroughly documented. And the authorities? They were taking her case seriously. The fraud charges alone could carry significant penalties, and with her lavish spending spree as evidence, her defense was already on shaky ground. I focused on moving forward, starting with the house. It no longer felt like a home. It was a reminder of the betrayal, of the lies that had festered in its walls. I decided to sell it, putting the memories of our life together behind me. It was just a house, after all. I could build something new, something better. The process of packing was unexpectedly cathartic. Every box I filled felt like I was shedding the weight of the past. Her things were still scattered throughout the house, but I didn't let them bother me. Most of it would be donated or thrown away. I didn't need her presence lingering in my new life. I found myself smiling more often, even laughing. The emptiness I had feared wasn't emptiness at all. It was space. Space to breathe, to think, to start again. My friends noticed the change in me. One even joked that I looked 10 years younger, as though I'd shed not just the marriage but the stress that came with it. But the best part of it all? Watching my career flourish. Without her distractions, I had the clarity and focus to dive into my work. The fraud detection initiative I'd used to trap her had caught the attention of industry leaders, earning me recognition I hadn't expected. Invitations to conferences, requests for consultations, and new opportunities poured in. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on solid ground. Of course, there were moments of doubt, fleeting thoughts of, what if? What if she had chosen to talk to me instead of betraying me? What if we had worked through whatever was driving her actions? But those thoughts were fleeting, overshadowed by the reality of what she had done. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to rebuild, and I wasn't about to waste my energy trying. The day I handed over the keys to the house was bittersweet. I stood in the empty living room, looking at the bare walls and scuffed floors, and felt a twinge of nostalgia. This had been my home, my sanctuary, for years. But now it was just another chapter closing, another step toward a new beginning. My new apartment was smaller, cozier, but it felt right. It was mine, free of the baggage that had weighed me down. I spent the first night there unpacking, sipping a glass of wine as I arranged my books and photos. It was quiet, but not lonely. I had built something new, something better, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly content. The best part was knowing that I had come out of this stronger. She had tried to take everything from me, but instead, she had given me something far more valuable: clarity. I knew who I was, what I wanted, and what I wouldn't tolerate. I had learned to trust myself, to rely on my instincts, and to prepare for the unexpected. As I sat on the balcony of my new place, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I raised my glass to the future. There were still challenges ahead, but I wasn't afraid of them. I had faced betrayal and come out on the other side, not just intact but thriving. This wasn't just a fresh start, it was a victory. Months had passed, but the events that unfolded still lingered in my mind, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of the strength I didn't know I had. Life had taken a sharp turn, and though the road was rocky at first, I'd found my footing again. Sitting on my apartment's balcony, the cool evening breeze brushing against my face, I reflected on everything that had led me here. At first, rebuilding felt like climbing a mountain with no end in sight. Letting go of the house, the life we had built, and even the remnants of trust one once had in her was harder than I admitted. But piece by piece, I began to reclaim parts of myself I had lost in the chaos. Each small victory, a new couch for the apartment, a successful project at work, a spontaneous dinner with friends, was like laying another brick in the foundation of my new life. I hadn't heard from her since the day she was taken away. The silence was a gift, honestly. I imagined her sitting somewhere, replaying her decisions and wondering where it all went wrong. I didn't need closure. The events had spoken for themselves. What she did was unforgivable, but instead of harboring resentment, I chose to focus on what lay ahead. The court proceedings had been swift and decisive. With the overwhelming evidence I'd provided, she had little ground to stand on. The fraud charges stuck, and the authorities seized the luxury items she had splurged on with my money. It was poetic justice, watching her lose the very things she had betrayed me for. The divorce, though bittersweet, brought its own sense of finality. The papers came in the mail one rainy afternoon, and as I signed my name on the dotted line, I didn't feel sorrow or anger, just relief. It was over. The chapter had closed, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Work had become a haven for me. The fraud detection system I had designed, which had not only protected me but exposed her, gained widespread recognition. Invitations to conferences poured in, and I found myself presenting at events where people looked to me as an expert. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her betrayal had inadvertently boosted my career. But it wasn't just work that had changed. My personal life blossomed in unexpected ways. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out after hearing about what happened, offering support and encouragement. I rekindled relationships I thought were long gone, finding comfort in the people who had always been there, even when I was too distracted to notice. One evening, during dinner with a close friend, they asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever regret it?" they asked, swirling their wine glass. "The marriage, I mean." I thought about it for a moment before answering. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret marrying her. She taught me something I might not have learned otherwise. How to protect myself, how to trust my instincts, and how to let go of what doesn't serve me." It was true. Her betrayal, as painful as it was, had been a catalyst for growth. It forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities and take control of my life in a way I hadn't before. I had learned to value myself, to recognize my worth, and to build boundaries that couldn't be crossed. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed something else. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had fueled me at first, driving me to set up the trap, gather the evidence, and ensure justice was served. But now, that anger had dissipated, replaced by something far more powerful: peace. I had survived the storm. More than that, I had thrived in its aftermath. The betrayal that was meant to break me had become the foundation for a life I was proud of. And as I sat there on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle like stars, I felt nothing but gratitude for the lessons learned, the strength gained, and the future that lay ahead. Because that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't define you. It challenges you. And if you rise to meet it, you come out stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. I raised my glass to the night sky, a quiet toast to the person I had become. The scars were there, faint reminders of the past, but they no longer hurt. They were simply part of my story, a story of resilience, of rebuilding, and of reclaiming the life I deserved.